a hidden valley isolated by jagged cliffs and dry earth. The year is 478 BCE. A frigid October morning tightens its grip over the plains of Laconia. Silence clings to the thick fog curling above the barracks of the Agoge, Sparta's infamous military academy, where boys are turned into warriors or discarded as failures. In a small, dark room carved from stone and sweat, a boy waits, naked except for a thin cloak. His name is Pyrros, 15 years old. He has not slept. The bones in his spine press hard against the cold floor, and the bruises on his back are barely healing from yesterday's flogging. His crime, stealing a barley cake and getting caught. Not stealing, theft was expected. Getting caught was the sin. Today, the punishment comes not from instructors or the iron rod of discipline, but from his peers. 7 other boys, older than him, chosen by the iron, the senior youth, will be granted the right to make an example of him. The price of failure in Sparta is not just physical pain. It is humiliation. It is exile. And sometimes it is death delivered in fragments of agony over hours or days. No words are spoken in the room. Only the sound of breath, controlled and shallow. Pyrros has been stripped of his rank, his mentor has refused to defend him, and his mother, if she still lives, would never claim him now. To raise a son in Sparta was to offer him as property to the state. If he was broken, he belonged to no one. Outside, the sun begins to rise behind the Taygetus Mountains. Its light stretches like a blade over the courtyard where the Irenes have gathered. Their eyes, hard and ancient for their young age, show no pity. Pity is weakness, and weakness is punished. The Agoge was not merely a training ground, it was a forge. Every boy entered at age 7, stripped of familial bonds, identity, softness. Taught to kill with his bare hands, to withstand cold and hunger without complaint, to speak only when necessary, and to obey even in madness. They were not taught how to think, but how to endure. The ritual is called helotic shame, an unofficial but traditional rite used only for boys who embarrassed their unit. Pyrros had begged his gods last night for a quick beating, maybe a broken limb, maybe 2. But when he was not summoned by the whipmaster, he knew it would be worse. A bell clangs once, low and final. It means the others are ready. 2 guards, more boys than men, enter and gesture for Pyrros to stand. He does, though his knees tremble. They lead him barefoot across sharp gravel, past stone columns and training pits where younger children wrestle in silence. He is not offered food, not even water. The punishment must be suffered on a dry tongue, on a starved belly. He is brought to the edge of a pit lined with stones, its center filled with sharp reeds and broken pottery. In the old times, it was said, this pit was used for throwing deformed babies, Sparta's first cruelty. Now it is symbolic. Pyrros is tied to a wooden frame facing the pit. His feet are forced into cold iron clamps. A cloth is wrapped tightly across his mouth, not to silence him, but to keep his tongue from biting through itself when pain overwhelms him, one by one. The other boys are handed slender canes, their tips coated in animal fat. This makes them sting more and tear skin on impact. The punishment begins, not with the strike, but with the chant. To fail is to shame. To shame is to bleed. Blood redeems. Each line is spoken slowly, coldly. On the 3rd, the canes begin to fall. Not random strikes, each one lands on a different part of Pyrrhos's body. The back, the thighs, the chest. A pattern designed to test his pain threshold, but more so, his silence. He does not scream. Spartan boys were told tales of others who died in silence under the whip, their tongues bitten clean off. One legend tells of a boy who hid a fox under his cloak to steal it, and when the fox began to eat through his stomach, he said nothing. He died standing. Pyrros knows this story well. He recites it in his mind between strikes. At 20 lashes, the canes are replaced with salted rope. The skin on his back now open and oozing, the salt burns like boiling water. He grits his teeth so hard his jaw cracks. At 30 lashes, the punishment stops. But not because it's over. Now comes the test of silence. A bowl of water is placed at Pyrrhos's feet. He cannot bend. He cannot move his arms. But it is in sight. They leave him like that, alone, bleeding, thirsty, in full view of the younger boys forced to watch. If he asks for water, the humiliation is complete. He will be labeled helot blood, lower than slave. If he endures, he might regain favor, possibly even be allowed to stay in the Agoge. He stands there for 3 hours, as the sun climbs, as the ants crawl across the wounds on his legs. He says nothing. He cries, but silently. His urine runs down his legs by the 2nd hour. No one moves. No one dares to. Finally, the Aren returns. He walks to Pyrros, studies his face, and then leans close. "You did not cry out," Pyrros says nothing. His mouth is bloodied cotton. "You did not ask for water," no reply. "Then you are still a son of Sparta." The boy faints before he hears the rest. When Pyrros awoke, it was not to cheering or praise or a healer's gentle touch. It was to darkness, a cold room lit by a single flickering torch. His body screamed with pain. Sharp, raw aches across his back and thighs, his limbs stiff like carved wood. His wrists were still bound, but the iron clamps were gone. He could breathe easier, but his skin stung with every movement. Dried blood crusted over his wounds like a second skin. Footsteps echoed from the stone hallway outside. He braced himself, expecting more punishment. Instead, the door opened to reveal Damon, the Iren who had ordered his trial. Damon was 17, lean but hard. A boy only in years. In his eyes was the calm cruelty that Sparta encouraged, detached but deliberate. He did not smile. "You lasted longer than expected," he said, kneeling beside Pyrros. Pyrros didn't answer. His lips were cracked open from dehydration. Damon held up a flask and placed it against his mouth. Pyrros drank, slowly, painfully, each swallow like scraping thorns. "They wanted you gone," Damon said, almost conversational. "They said you brought shame, that you were soft, a failed hunt, a failed theft. You didn't just get caught. You panicked." He paused. "Do you know what panic is in Sparta?" Pyrros shook his head weakly. "It's treason." The words stung harder than the whip. Panic meant fear, hesitation, self-preservation. All sins in a culture that demanded absolute fearlessness, even unto death. "Your father," Damon continued, "died at Thermopylae." Shields shattered. He refused to retreat. Pyrros looked up. The room spun, but he held Damon's gaze. "No." "Then act like it." Damon stood. "You'll be taken back to the barracks at dawn. Not as a full trainee, but as a cryptes." Pyrrhus's eyes widened. The Cryptia, Sparta's most feared secret unit. An elite group of young warriors sent into the countryside at night. Their mission was not battle. It was control. They hunted helots, the enslaved majority of Sparta. They killed at will. No orders, no oversight. Only survival and silence. It was said that to be chosen for the Cryptia was either the greatest honor or a slow, invisible death. You will be given no armor, no torch, no food. You will disappear into the hills tonight. If you return after a week alive with a helot's token, you will be welcomed back. If you die, then at least you died serving Sparta. Damon turned to leave, but paused at the door. "There's a blade under the straw. Hide it well. You'll need it." Then he was gone. That night, with stars cutting through the sky like slashes of silver, Pyrros was led out of the city gates. No farewell, no escort, no food. Just the clothes on his back and the blade Damon had left him, small, curved, worn from use. He entered the wilderness barefoot, his wounds raw and open. Every step across dry grass and sharp rocks sent fire up his spine. But he moved forward, not just from obedience, but because if he stopped he would die. Out there, in the hills beyond Sparta, roamed helot rebels, desperate men who had escaped slavery. They hated Spartans more than they feared death, especially boys from the Agoge, especially boys like Pyrros. For the first 2 days, he moved only at night. By day, he hid in thickets, under trees, or between stone ruins older than any memory. He ate nothing. He drank from muddy puddles. He slept in short, haunted bursts, never fully unconscious, always half alert. The 3rd night, he found them. Smoke. Faint. Just over a ridge, a campfire too well hidden for common travelers. He approached silently, belly to the dirt, crawling with slow care. His breath was shallow, each inhale a knife to his ribs. There were 3 of them, helots, rough-bearded, armed with farming tools, turned weapons, sickles, hammers, sticks sharpened to points. One was snoring. Another was staring into the flames. The third sharpened a blade made from rusted iron. They looked nothing like the Spartan instructors who barked orders and beat boys into warriors. But they were dangerous in a different way, desperate. Men who had lost everything but the will to kill their masters, and Pyrros was what they hated most. He could turn back. Survive in the woods, maybe. Lies say he killed one. But the Agoge did not reward lies. They would know. If he returned without blood, his death would be public, ceremonial, slow. He waited until the fire dimmed. Then he moved, like a shadow, silent and certain. Pyrros crept closer, every movement precise, heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. The ground was cold, but his palms were soaked with sweat. The fire crackled softly ahead, just enough to cast flickering shadows on the rocks. He studied their positions again, 3 men, one sleeping, one half dozing by the fire. When sharpening a blade, the one sharpening was the real threat. Pyrros remembered what they told him at the Agoge. If you must kill, kill without hesitation. Fear is louder than footsteps. He took the blade Damon had given him from inside his tunic. It was dull, rust-eaten, but sharp enough at the tip. Not ideal, but enough to bleed with. He moved toward the edge of a boulder, low and quick. 20 feet, 15, 10. The sleeping one snorted and shifted in his sleep. Pyrros froze. The man by the fire glanced sideways, suspicious. He squinted into the darkness. Pyrros didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Eventually the helot looked away. Just for a second, that's when Pyrros moved. He launched forward, driving the blade straight into the sleeping man's throat before he even opened his eyes. The gurgle that followed was wet, disgusting, and violent, but brief. The other 2 jumped up, shouting in shock. Pyrros didn't retreat. He charged at the man by the fire with reckless speed, blood splashing his hands, eyes wide. The man lunged to grab him, but Pyrros ducked under his reach and slashed across his thigh. The helot screamed, dropped to one knee. Pyrros brought the blade down again, this time into his shoulder, then again and again. It was messy. It wasn't skill. It was survival. The last helot, the one sharpening the blade, finally reacted. He rushed in, grabbing Pyrros by the collar and slamming him against a rock. The world shook. Pyrrhos's vision blurred. The taste of iron filled his mouth, blood maybe his own. The man punched him once, then again. Spartan dog. The helot spat. His breath was hot, foul with old onions and rot. I'll skin you for what your people did to mine. He raised the rusted weapon, ready to bring it down, but Pyrros, instinct wild and unfiltered, reached out and jammed his thumb deep into the man's eye. The scream was high and ragged, filled with animal pain. The man staggered back, clutching his face, blinded. Pyrros, dazed but still standing, picked up the dropped sickle, and with a final brutal cry, he brought it down across the man's neck, once, twice. On the 3rd strike, the man collapsed. Silence returned to the camp, not the silence of peace, the silence of the dead. Pyrros dropped the sickle and fell to his knees, panting, shaking, his hands covered in blood that wasn't all his. His shoulders burned. His back screamed. His mouth tasted like dirt, but he was alive. 3 men dead. One blade. One night, he stayed there until sunrise, watching their faces, wondering if they had sons. If they had once been boys like him. He took a strip of cloth from one of the bodies, red and stained with sweat, and tied it around his neck. It would be his token. Proof of the kill, a mark of savagery or survival. At dawn, Pyrros began the walk back to Sparta, not a march. Not proud, but upright. Each step left a bloody footprint behind him. The gates of Sparta rose from the earth like the jaws of a beast, stone and iron, shadowed by the high ridges of Mount Taygetus. Pyrros limped toward them, his legs heavy, torn sandals slapping the dust. He had not eaten in 4 days. His arms ached from the kill. His ribs throbbed from where the helot had slammed him. Blood had dried in a dozen places on his skin, cracked and flaking like old paint. but around his neck hung the proof, the red strip of cloth, darkened now with dried helot blood. His token of survival. He reached the outer wall just as the sun climbed over the peaks. The guards saw him and raised no alarm. One of them, an older man with half a nose, simply nodded. "You lived," he muttered, not impressed. Not surprised, just acknowledging fact. That was Sparta. Pyrros was taken back to the Agoge, but not to the common barracks. He was led instead to the Black Hall, where initiates were judged by the elders, the Gerousia. The hallway smelled of bronze oil and cold ash. On the walls, wooden panels bore the names of past warriors who had died in glory. No one smiled when he entered. No warm welcome, just silence. The room was arranged like a theatre. Stone benches forming a half-circle, each elder shrouded in a red cloak. At the center stood Damon, arms crossed, jaw set. Pyrros stood alone in the middle, barefoot, covered in blood and dirt. He didn't lower his head. His body may have bent from pain, but his gaze didn't. One of the elders, an old man with a scar that ran down from scalp to lip, finally spoke. "You killed 3. Pyrros gave a small nod. "Yes." "Were they armed?" "Yes." "Did they fight?" "Yes." "Did you feel fear?" This question hung longer. Pyrros answered, voice low. "Yes." The room tensed. Some elders shifted. Damon stepped forward, but the scarred elder held up a hand, stopping him. "And did you act, despite that fear?" Pyrros nodded again. "I did." Another pause. Then the old man let out a long breath. "Then you have passed." No applause. No words of praise, only that single sentence. But in Sparta that meant everything. That night, back in the barracks, the other boys looked at him differently. Not with admiration, not with jealousy, but with a wary respect. Pyrros had not just survived. He had returned, changed. There was a new stillness in his eyes, the kind only seen in those who had killed with their own hands, not in training drills, but in darkness, with real screams and real blood. He didn't speak much. The others didn't ask. He was given a new cot, closer to the senior boys. His wounds were cleaned by the barrack healer, a man with missing fingers who said little but gave him a nod of approval as he stitched his back. That night, Pyrros slept, not peacefully. He dreamed of the helot with the rusted blade, of being slammed into the stone, of the eye he had gouged and the blood that had sprayed on his face. He dreamed of the fire, of the screams. But he also dreamed of his father, standing on a cliff, spear in hand, staring down 1,000 Persians, saying nothing, just standing. When Pyrros woke the next morning, the sky was grey. Rain whispered on the roof tiles, and something inside him had hardened. He joined the morning drills without complaint. His body screamed, but he stayed silent. He ran laps on torn feet. He lifted heavy stones with blood-caked hands, and when the iron told him to strike, he didn't hesitate. Later that week, Damon called him aside. "Do you know why I made you cryptes?" he asked. Pyrros shook his head. "It wasn't a punishment," Damon said. "It was a gamble." Pyrros waited. "You were either going to die, or you were going to come back a wolf." Damon stepped closer, voice lowering. "And now you're a wolf." He placed a hand on Pyrrhos's shoulder, firm, heavy. "But remember this, even wolves get culled if they turn on the pack." Pyrros nodded. The lesson was clear. He had earned his place back in the Agoge, but the price of failure would never disappear. In Sparta there was no final safety, no comfort, only the next test. The next blood, always more blood. The rain hadn't stopped in 2 days, not the violent, crashing kind that broke trees or flooded fields, but the slow, soaking drizzle that seemed to seep into bone, wearing down mind and body alike. The Agoge training yard had turned to thick red mud. Weapons clashed. Bare feet slapped the ground. Boys grunted through clenched jaws, pushing, swinging. Bleeding, always bleeding. Pyrros was among them now. Not just tolerated, but observed. The instructors watched him carefully, their dark eyes tracking every move he made. Not because he was failing, but because he wasn't. In the past week, he had bested 2 older boys in wrestling drills, endured a bone-deep wound in his thigh without a sound. and broken another trainee's nose in single combat. But something had changed in him. Everyone saw it. He no longer hesitated. His strikes landed fast, without flair or emotion. Even when an opponent cried out, Pyrros didn't stop until the whistle blew. There was no pride in it, no anger, no cruelty, just silence. That silence unsettled the others. And the instructors noticed, so they gave him something different, a new trial, one the other boys hadn't faced yet. They called it the labyrinth. Damon delivered the instructions in private, away from the others. His voice was calm, but there was something in his tone that Pyrros hadn't heard before, something sharper than usual. Not fear, not warning, but maybe hesitation. "There is a chamber beneath the old barracks," Damon said. "A tunnel system left from before the last Messenian War. It was used to break prisoners." Pyrros said nothing. "They send one every few years. It's not part of the official Agoge. It's older than the curriculum." "Why?" Pyrros asked. "To test what's left of your mind," Damon replied. "You've proven your body won't fail. Now we find out if your thoughts will." That night, after the other boys had fallen asleep, Pyrros was led by torchlight to a hatch in the floor of a half-ruined training hall. The door groaned open, revealing a set of stone steps slick with moss and damp air. He was handed a single torch. No food, no armor, no water, just the words, "You come out when you find the statue." Pyrros descended without looking back. The tunnel swallowed him whole. The stone passage twisted and narrowed in impossible angles. Every footstep echoed strangely, like the sound was folding in on itself. The torch sputtered in the damp air, the light casting shapes that moved just wrong enough to make his skin crawl. The silence was heavier than any whip. And then the whispering began. At first he thought it was the wind, then he realized it was in his own voice. "You should have died in the hills. They hate you. You're not a wolf." "You're a mistake," Pyrros paused. His breathing slowed. He tightened his grip on the torch and moved forward. He passed bones. Old ones, broken finger bones, jaw bones with teeth missing, burn marks on the walls, scratch marks, a dark smear of something that looked and smelled like rot. The labyrinth was not just a physical trial, it was psychological warfare, designed to test whether a warrior could stay sane when the gods themselves whispered doubt. For hours, maybe days, Pyrros wandered. Hunger gnawed at his belly, thirst cracked his throat. He heard footsteps that didn't belong to him, breathing that wasn't his. At one point, he turned and saw a figure behind him, a boy, bleeding, silent, his own face. He blinked. It was gone. Then came the voice he wasn't expecting, his father's. "Why did you shame us?" Pyrros dropped the torch. It fell to the stone floor and hissed out, swallowed by the wet. Darkness took everything, and now there was only his breath, his heart, and those words, "Why did you shame us?" Pyrros fell to his knees. Every failure, every moment of fear, every memory of begging in his own head rose like bile. He screamed, not loud, not wild, just a sound, raw and real, and when the echo finally died, something changed. He stood, blind, soaked, half-starved, but steady. He moved forward in darkness, one hand dragging along the wall, the other clenched in a fist, until finally his hand touched stone, smooth, cold, carved, a figure. He reached up. Trembling, it was a Spartan warrior, kneeling, head bowed. Underneath, carved into the base, "He who kneels to himself conquers all." The words burned into him. Pyrros collapsed beside the statue. Sleep took him like a flood. He awoke to light. The hatch above had opened. Damon looked down at him, eyes unreadable. "You saw it?" he asked. Pyrros nodded. "I saw myself." Damon reached down, grabbed his arm and pulled him out. "You're ready," he said. But Pyrros already knew. The Agoge had done what it was meant to do. It hadn't made him fearless. It had made him empty of fear. 2 weeks passed. The bruises faded. The cuts on Pyrros's arms crusted over, flaked and disappeared. But something in him had not healed, and would never. The boys in the Agoge now avoided him, without even knowing why. Not out of spite. Not because they feared him, but because he no longer looked like one of them. He looked older, as if what lived in him had eaten whatever was once innocent. Whatever boy remained beneath the scars had been burned away in the dark beneath the barracks. Even Damon treated him differently now, less like a student, more like a tool, which is exactly what he had become. That morning, before the sun broke the sky, Damon summoned Pyrros alone to the temple steps. There, waiting in the early mist, stood 3 men dressed not in red cloaks, but dark bronze armor. Their faces were veiled, but their eyes glittered like obsidian stones. They were from the Gerusia's inner council, Sparta's political elite. And when they called your name, it meant one thing: you were no longer a boy. You were about to be used. The tallest of them spoke. His voice was deep but smooth, the kind of voice that didn't shout, it commanded. "There is a merchant in Githeo," he said. "He's feeding silver to Argive spies. He has blood on his hands, Spartan blood." The ephors demand silence. Not trials, not war. Pyrros said nothing. He understood what they wanted. Not judgment, execution. "This man is protected by trade law," the second added, "and under patronage from a Corinthian house. A public punishment would mean political fallout, but a message delivered quietly is acceptable." Pyrros met the man's gaze. "And if I'm seen?" "Then you were never a Spartan. Simple, clean. If he succeeded, he became part of Sparta's hidden fist, one of the few weapons they used in the shadows. If he failed, he would die alone, forgotten, labeled a traitor or madman." He nodded. "When do I leave?" The third man finally stepped forward. He held out a dagger, its blade narrow and black, with a carved ivory handle. On its hilt the letter L Lambda, the mark of Laconia. Pyrros took it. "Now," the man said. He left before noon, dressed in the clothes of a slave. Simple, dirty, forgettable. No helmet, no armor. Just a thin brown cloak, a short sword hidden in the folds, and the black dagger tucked in his boot. The road to Githeo stretched long and winding through pine groves and wild brush. Traders passed him without a second glance. No one saw a boy. They saw a beaten servant. That was the point. He entered the city at dusk, slipping past the merchant gates near the port where sailboats bobbed like drunk dancers on wine-dark water. He found the house quickly, larger than it should have been, surrounded by guards dressed as servants. Subtle, but not subtle enough. He waited until the third watch, hiding behind a pottery stand, until the lights inside began to dim. He climbed the back wall using a broken section of vine-covered stone. His fingers bled. He made no sound. Inside, he stalked through the courtyard like a shadow. The man was sleeping on a couch, fat, thick-fingered, snoring through a half-open mouth. A goblet of wine still clutched in one hand, gold rings on every finger. Pyrros stood over him for a long moment. This was the first time his target hadn't fought back. The man just lay there, vulnerable, soft, and blind to danger. Pyrros thought about hesitation, about the fear they beat out of him, about the silence in the labyrinth. He reached for the dagger and paused. For the first time, he wondered what this man's name was, what his family would think, whether he deserved this fate, or if he was just another piece on the board of politics that boys like Pyrros were used to tip over. But then he remembered Damon's words. Even wolves get culled if they turn on the pack. So he buried the blade in the man's throat, quick, quiet, precise. Blood soaked the couch. Pyrros left through the same wall. No one saw him. By morning, the city was whispering of a merchant found with his throat cut and silver stolen, but nothing else, no witnesses, no suspects, no trace. Sparta's message had been delivered. When Pyrros returned 2 days later, Damon was waiting outside the barracks. He said only 2 words: good work, no feast, no ceremony, no brotherhood, just those words. Pyrros walked past him in silence and returned to the courtyard, where the other boys trained, but they no longer saw him. They felt him and they stepped aside. The mission came 3 days later. No summons this time. No whispered instructions from veiled men in dark cloaks. Just a folded piece of leather tucked under Pyrrhos's sleeping mat, sealed with wax and stamped with the mark of the Gerusia. When he broke it open, there were only 6 words: "You know the mountain. Bring justice." He stared at it for a long time. There was no name, No time, no weapon. But he understood immediately. They were sending him home. The mountain it spoke of was Mount Taygetus, the place where Spartan infants were judged by the elders after birth. If a child was weak, malformed, or cried too much, they were thrown from the cliffs above a jagged ravine called the Apothetai. It was where Sparta discarded its mistakes. Pyrros had been brought there as a baby, like all of them, but unlike some, he had survived. And now, for reasons unexplained, he was being sent back there to bring justice. He left without a word. No one stopped him. No one asked where he was going. They didn't need to. They had learned to leave Pyrros alone. The climb was brutal. The rocks were wet with late autumn rain, and the wind howled across the peaks like the voices of the dead. He passed the old tree where boys were hung by the arms during beatings. He passed the altar where goats were slaughtered for omens. He passed the bones, still there, of the unclaimed, children no one had ever come to bury. He reached the edge of the Apothetai at dusk. There was already someone waiting. Man, cloaked, hooded, standing near the edge with a torch and a staff. Pyrros approached slowly, hand on his dagger. The man turned. Pyrros stopped cold. It was Archeon. He had been one of the senior instructors in Pyrrhos's early Agoge years. Merciless, vicious, always choosing the weakest boys for the harshest punishments. Pyrros remembered the beatings, the starvation drills, the time Archeon had ordered him into the icy river for hours until his skin turned blue. He had vanished 3 years ago. Rumors said he'd been expelled for cruelty. Others said he had been caught abusing his position for pleasure. Now he was here, smiling. "You remember me," Archeon said. Pyrros didn't answer. "Good," the man chuckled. "They said they'd send someone." "I didn't think it'd be you." Pyrros said only one word. "Why?" Archeon turned back toward the cliff, looking down into the fog-choked ravine. "Because I broke the code," he said. "I killed a boy, not a weakling. A strong one, the son of a councilman. I made it look like an accident, but someone knew. They let me disappear. Until now," he looked back, "they're cleaning their hands. And you're the soap." Pyrros stepped forward. "You deserve worse than the cliff." Archeon's smile faded. "You think I haven't suffered up here? Alone, with nothing but ghosts." He opened his cloak. A knife hung from his belt, a bottle of wine. "Half drunk. Come on then," Archeon said. "Let's see what you learned." He tossed the torch to the side, and the two of them rushed into the fading light. The fight was savage. Archeon was stronger, older, dirtier. He fought like a man who had nothing left, grabbing, spitting, kicking. Pyrros took a punch to the ribs, then one to the mouth. Blood filled his mouth, hot and sharp. But he didn't retreat. He moved like the wolf they'd made him, fast, precise, no wasted motion. He slashed Archeon across the chest, then elbowed him in the throat. The man stumbled backward, coughing. Pyrros didn't stop. He drove his dagger into Archeon's thigh, twisted, and kicked him in the chest, sending him sprawling to the edge of the cliff. Archeon clutched at the rocks, coughing blood. "You think this makes you better than me?" he spat. "You're just a younger monster." Pyrros knelt beside him. "No," he said quietly. "I'm the one they made to clean up monsters like you." Then he drove the dagger into Archeon's neck and pushed his body over the edge. The sound of it falling vanished into the fog. Pyrros stood, alone on the mountain. No cheers, no thanks, no gods, just the wind. By the time he returned to Sparta, the guards didn't even ask where he'd been. They just stepped aside. He walked into the barracks and lay down on his mat. When he turned over the leather beneath it, he found another note. 3 words this time. 1 mission left. 3 words. 1 mission left. Pyrros sat in the dark long after the note had crumbled in his hand. The fire in the barracks crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the faces of boys who still dreamed of glory, of honor, of becoming warriors. He had been one of them once. Now he was something else, not broken, not fully whole, but forged. And this final mission, whatever it was, would not be for Sparta's enemies. That much he knew in his gut. The dagger in his boot had not tasted Persian blood, nor Argive, nor Theban, only Spartans. Sparta did not kill its enemies in the shadows. It crushed them in daylight, on the battlefield. Only its problems were sent to the shadows, only its embarrassments, and Pyrros had become the hand that erased them. At dawn, Damon was waiting at the cliffside sanctuary overlooking the city, a place where only blooded warriors were allowed to stand. Pyrros joined him without a word. Damon didn't look at him at first, just stared down at the rooftops, the smoky tendrils rising from morning fires, the training grounds in the distance where boys ran in formation, wooden swords clashing. Then he spoke. "Sparta is dying." Pyrros frowned. "We win every war." "Yes," Damon nodded, "but we lose every soul." He turned, finally meeting Pyrrhos's eyes. And there was something there, beneath the hard surface, that Pyrros had never seen before. "Regret I was you once," Damon said. "I killed my first man before I had hair on my chest. I passed the labyrinth. I was their blade for years, and every time I came back they called me useful, not honorable, not brave, just useful." Pyrrhos's throat tightened. He didn't know why. Damon stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They sent you to kill Archeon because he became an embarrassment, not because they cared about the boy he murdered. That boy was forgotten the moment his father fell from power." He paused. "And now they've sent you to kill me." Pyrros didn't move, but his heart dropped. Damon held out a folded note. Same wax seal, same mark. Pyrros took it, opened it. Inside, "Execute the Iron Daemon. Reason, political deviance." That was all. No trial, no defense, just judgment from the same people who had turned them both into weapons. Pyrros looked up. Damon had already unbuckled his sword. He tossed it aside. "No tricks," he said. "No fight. I'm tired." "Why?" Pyrros asked quietly. Damon smiled bitterly. "Because I told a councilman that Sparta should teach more than killing, that we should stop culling our own sons like sick animals, that maybe discipline without mercy breeds monsters." He laughed softly. They didn't like that. A long silence stretched between them. Then Damon stepped forward and placed a hand on Pyrrhos's shoulder, the same way he had after the labyrinth. "You don't have to do it," he whispered. "But if you don't, they'll send someone else. And you'll be the next target." Pyrrhos's hand found the dagger at his belt, the same dagger that had ended a traitor, a corrupt merchant, and a sadist hiding on a mountain. He looked into Damon's eyes. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of choice. Not discipline, not fear, choice. He drove the dagger forward, but not into Damon. He turned and hurled it off the cliff, watched as it vanished into the valley below. Then he said, "No." Damon blinked. "What?" "I won't kill for them again." He turned to walk away, but two shadows emerged from behind the stone wall, council assassins. They had been waiting, watching, insurance, the first charged. Pyrros dropped low, swept his legs. The man collapsed hard. Pyrros snatched his own fallen dagger from the ground as the second lunged. He caught the blade in his side, but spun and buried his own into the man's chest. The first attacker rose, bloodied but alive. Pyrros tackled him backward, slamming him into the wall, breaking bone. He finished him with a single brutal strike to the throat. It was over in seconds. Damon stared in disbelief. "You chose death." Pyrros wiped the blood from his mouth. "No," he said, "I chose freedom." That night he fled Sparta, through goat paths and mountain caves, avoiding guards, traps and spies. By the time they noticed, he was already beyond the Eurotas River. By the time they sent someone after him, he was across the Taygetus range. He wandered for years, through Argos, through Delphi, across the Aegean Sea. Some say he became a mercenary. Others say he vanished into the northern forests, living as a ghost, but in whispered corners of Spartan memory, his name became legend. The boy who survived the Agoge, the one who passed every test, the one who killed when ordered, until he didn't. Inside Sparta's deadly discipline, the price of failure was not always death. Sometimes it was survival, and survival in Sparta was rebellion. End of story. Let me know if you'd like a different story from the same universe, or a continuation of Pyrrhos's life beyond Sparta.